Your position is being eliminated. Accept this entry-level role or leave. The HR director stared at the wall behind me, not even granting me the dignity of eye contact. 21 years of my life, reduced to a 20-minute meeting where they couldn't even look at me. My throat tightened. Can I have until tomorrow? My voice barely audible as I thought about the mortgage payment due in 3 days. My name is Andrew Caldwell. I'm 49 years old, and for exactly 21 years, I had poured everything into building this company's reputation. While colleagues attended their kids' baseball games and weekend fishing trips, I stayed behind on job sites, making sure every beam was properly installed, every safety protocol followed. My dedication transformed a struggling local contractor into the region's premier commercial construction company. Every year-end bonus celebration, executives toasted record profits I had directly secured through relationships built with blood, sweat, and honest work. That evening, a former coworker sent me a text. Heard about what happened. For your information, your position wasn't eliminated. Brandon starts Monday. Before I tell you how I turned this betrayal into the most satisfying professional comeback of my career, I want to be clear about something. What you're about to hear isn't just another workplace drama. It's a blueprint for recognizing your own value when others fail to. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cast aside despite your dedication, this story is for you. Listen until the end, because the strategy I used didn't just restore my dignity, it completely transformed the power dynamic in ways nobody saw coming. For those who know me professionally, I've always been the problem solver, the guy who could handle any crisis on a job site with a mixture of technical knowledge and genuine relationship building. I built my reputation on delivering projects on time and under budget, finding solutions where others saw dead ends. My crews used to joke that I could convince a union steward to work overtime on Christmas, but it wasn't charm that built my success. It was genuine respect for the work and the people who did it. Outside of work, I lived a deliberately simple life. My small ranch house with its unfinished basement workshop and collection of vintage craftsman tools was my sanctuary. I'd been widowed for 3 years, lost my wife Sarah to cancer, and was raising my 17-year-old son Jake and 14-year-old daughter Emma on my own. The kids were everything to me. Jake had real potential for a baseball scholarship, and Emma was honor roll material heading for engineering school. I never remarried, not because I didn't want to, but because rebuilding the family seemed more important than rebuilding my personal life. I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious as weeks passed. Project meetings that somehow missed my calendar. Strategic discussions relocated to impromptu golf outings where boots and hard hats weren't welcome. Contractor coordination requests that bypassed my desk despite my 21-year history with these relationships. But when you've built your identity around a company for over 2 decades, denial becomes a powerful force. I chose to believe these were oversights rather than orchestrated exclusions. The morning of my demotion began like any other. I arrived at 6:30 a.m., 90 minutes before most of the staff, reviewing blueprints and preparing for the week's safety meetings. My calendar showed a 10:30 meeting with Helen Pierce from HR, unusual, but I assumed it was about the new health insurance changes that had been announced company-wide. When I entered the small conference room, Helen wasn't alone. Our legal counsel, Diana Foster, sat beside her with a manila folder. Neither offered a handshake. After their bombshell announcement, I sat motionless, my mind racing through calculations. The maintenance coordinator position they offered came with a 62% pay cut. My mortgage, Jake's potential college expenses, Emma's advanced placement program costs, even basic utilities would become impossible. This is happening regardless of your performance, Helen added, as if this clarification offered comfort. The company is restructuring. Restructuring typically involves advance notice, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. Severance packages, transition periods. Diana Foster cleared her throat. This is the transition period. We're offering you continued employment when we could simply terminate your position. I wanted to scream that 21 years of loyalty deserved more than this clinical disposal, but instead I asked for 24 hours to consider their generous offer. Back at my desk, I noticed colleagues averting their eyes. News traveled fast in a construction company. My computer access had already been restricted. I could no longer view project schedules or contractor databases. 2 decades of institutional knowledge, and they had already begun erasing my digital footprint. I maintained composure while collecting personal items from my desk. A photo of Sarah and the kids from our last family vacation, a handwritten thank you note from the mayor after we completed the new library ahead of schedule. Small treasures that suddenly felt like artifacts from another life. In my truck, the professional facade crumbled. I gripped the steering wheel, pressure building behind my eyes, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, a strange clarity emerged. I reached for my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd worked with for 15 years but never needed to call for personal reasons. Russell Martinez, general manager at Allied Construction Partners, the $18 million annual contract I had personally negotiated and managed for our company's most profitable relationship. Russell answered on the second ring. "Andrew, this is unexpected. Everything okay with the hospital project preparations?" I hesitated only briefly. "Russell, I'm calling with a personal update. The company has eliminated my position effective immediately." The silence on the line stretched for several seconds. "That's surprising," he finally said, his tone shifting to something more guarded. "May I ask why?" Restructuring was the official explanation. Another pause. "Where are you right now?" "Sitting in my truck in the company parking lot." "Stay there. I'm finishing up a site inspection across town, 25 minutes. I didn't question why the general manager of our largest contractor would drop everything to meet me. In 15 years of project collaboration, Russell and I had developed something beyond the typical client-contractor dynamic. We'd navigated construction delays together, solved impossible logistics problems, and established a foundation of mutual respect built on shared experience in the field. 27 minutes later, Russell's white F-250 pulled alongside my truck. He gestured toward a diner across the street. Inside, over untouched coffee, Russell revealed what I had suspected but couldn't confirm. My company had been positioning Brandon Ashford, the CEO's son, to take over my contractor relationships for months. They'd already arranged informal meetings with several key partners, including Allied Construction. "He's smart enough," Russell said, "but completely green." During our lunch meeting, he spent more time talking about efficiency metrics than asking about actual project needs. When I mentioned the custom safety protocols you developed for our high-rise work, he suggested we switch to standard industry guidelines to reduce complexity. I felt a flicker of vindication. The safety protocols Russell mentioned had taken me months to develop specifically for Allied's unique equipment and crew preferences. It was one of many customizations I'd created to cement our relationship and eliminate accidents. "Here's what you need to know," Russell continued, leaning forward. "Our master service agreement renews in 45 days. We've been approached by 4 competitors in the last month alone. The only reason we haven't entertained their proposals is because of the relationship we have with you." My mind raced with implications. "Russell, I appreciate that, but let me finish," he interrupted. "Allied is expanding. We're acquiring 2 smaller contractors next quarter, which means our project capacity will increase substantially. We've been discussing whether to expand our agreement with your firm or bring more services in-house." He paused. "I'd prefer a third option, working with you as an independent consultant, initially to manage this transition, but potentially longer term." I stared at him, processing the suggestion. "You want me to leave and take your business with me?" Russell shook his head. "I want to hire the person who's been essential to our success. The contract with your firm is a separate matter that our board will decide based on who's advising us during this critical expansion period." I thought about the mortgage payment looming, about 21 years of loyalty rewarded with a humiliating demotion, about Brandon Ashford stepping into relationships I had cultivated through countless early mornings and weekend emergencies. "I need to think about this," I said. Russell nodded. "Of course, but don't think too long. 45 days moves quickly in this business." That evening, I sat on my back deck watching Diesel, my German Shepherd, patrol the yard perimeter. The simple routine of his movements contrasted sharply with the complexity of my situation. My phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, some expressing genuine shock, others fishing for details they could relay through the company gossip network. One message stood out. Sophie Walsh, our administrative assistant who had started as an intern during my early years, wrote, "They've already moved someone into your office. New nameplate reads Brandon Ashford, Senior Project Manager, thought you should know." Brandon Ashford, the CEO's son, now had my title with senior added for good measure. I poured a beer and considered my options. I could accept the maintenance coordinator position, swallowing my pride while searching for new opportunities. I could walk away with nothing but a 21-year gap in my resume. Or I could take Russell's offer, effectively using my contractor relationships to establish myself independently. The third option felt like a betrayal of my professional principles. I had always prided myself on ethical conduct, on building success through service rather than manipulation. Using contractor relationships for personal gain seemed to cross a line I had never imagined approaching, but as night fell and I calculated how many months I could survive on my savings, something shifted in my perspective. The company had discarded 21 years of loyalty without hesitation. They had already begun erasing my contributions, rewriting the narrative of relationships I had built. Was it really unethical to continue serving a contractor who valued my expertise regardless of which company name appeared on my business card? By morning, I had made my decision, but not the one Russell expected. I arrived at the office at my usual early hour and sent a brief email accepting the maintenance coordinator position in facilities management. Within minutes, I received confused responses from both HR and my former manager. This wasn't the outcome they had anticipated. They had expected, perhaps hoped for, an indignant resignation. When I arrived at my new desk in the facilities department, the confusion was palpable. Younger employees whispered behind cubicle walls, wondering why someone from upper management would accept such a demotion. My new supervisor, a woman 20 years my junior, awkwardly explained my reduced responsibilities with frequent reassurances that you probably already know this, but procedure requires I explain it. My strategy was simple: visibility and information. The maintenance coordinator position gave me legitimate access to the building, to basic company systems, and most importantly, to observe. I needed to understand exactly how Brandon Ashford would approach the Allied Construction relationship before making my next move. I called Russell that afternoon. "I've decided to accept your consulting offer," I told him, "but I'm also staying at the firm in a different capacity for now." "That's unusual," he replied, clearly surprised. "May I ask why?" "To ensure a proper transition. Allied deserves continuity of service. I want to make certain your needs are fully communicated to my replacement." Russell's tone suggested he didn't entirely believe this explanation, but he didn't press further. "And when would you begin consulting with us?" "I could start providing independent advisory services immediately after hours. We'd need to be careful about potential conflicts of interest." Of course, Russell agreed, a new note of respect in his voice. He recognized strategy when he heard it. Over the next 3 weeks, I lived a carefully compartmentalized existence. During the day, I performed basic maintenance coordination tasks with meticulous attention to detail. I arrived early, stayed late, and maintained a pleasant, helpful demeanor that confused those who had expected resentment. After hours, I met with Russell and his team to develop a comprehensive analysis of their current service agreement. I created detailed documentation of every customization, every workaround, every special arrangement I had implemented over the years, knowledge that existed primarily in my head and scattered notes rather than formal company documentation. Meanwhile, I observed Brandon Ashford's approach to project management. He was exactly as Russell had described: confident but inexperienced, more focused on impressing than understanding. He made swift decisions to modernize processes without grasping their purpose. He scheduled contractor meetings during their peak construction hours. He dismissed concerns raised by site supervisors who had worked alongside me for years. Most critically, he began dismantling the custom safety protocols I had built for Allied Construction, insisting that transitioning to standard industry practices would showcase our newest methodologies and streamline their operations. What he failed to understand, what nobody had documented because it had evolved organically through my relationship with Russell's crews, was that Allied operated with specialized equipment that required modified safety procedures. The custom protocols weren't a preference. They were essential for compliance with their insurance requirements and OSHA regulations specific to their high-rise specialty work. When the protocol transition began causing safety violations, Brandon dismissed them as temporary adjustment issues rather than fundamental incompatibilities. The project team, now reporting to him, tried to raise concerns but were overruled. 4 weeks into my demotion, Russell requested an urgent meeting with company leadership to address serious concerns about project coordination. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at 9 a.m. Brandon appeared unconcerned, assuring everyone that contractors always get nervous during transitions and that he would smooth things over. That Friday afternoon, I received an unexpected meeting invitation from the CEO's assistant. The calendar items simply read Allied Construction discussion with my name alongside Brandon's and the executive team. Someone had finally remembered that I might have relevant knowledge about our most important contractor relationship. I spent the weekend preparing not for the meeting as they expected, but for what would come after. I reviewed my consulting agreement with Russell, confirmed that my non-compete only covered direct competitors rather than contractors, and finalized my recommendations for Allied service restructuring. Monday morning arrived with the particular tension that accompanies high-stakes meetings. When I arrived at the executive conference room, conversation stopped abruptly. CEO Paul Ashford's expression flickered between confusion and annoyance at my presence. "Andrew," he acknowledged with a nod that suggested I should explain myself. I received an invitation. I replied simply, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Before he could respond, Russell entered with Allied's operations manager and safety coordinator. The energy in the room shifted immediately as everyone recognized the seriousness of 3 senior executives attending what should have been a routine contractor meeting. After brief introductions, Russell opened with devastating clarity. "We've asked for this meeting to address significant concerns about our project coordination. Over the past month, we've experienced multiple safety protocol failures, missed coordination deadlines, and a concerning lack of responsiveness to our specific requirements. Brandon immediately began offering reassurances, but Russell continued, without acknowledgement. More troubling than these operational issues is the apparent loss of institutional knowledge about our specialized needs. The custom safety protocols that were essential to our high-rise operations have been eliminated without adequate replacement. Paul Ashford leaned forward. Brandon has been implementing our newest industry standard protocols, which offer enhanced safety features beyond the legacy systems. We weren't informed of any planned changes to protocols that were functioning correctly for our purposes. Russell replied evenly, "Sometimes we need to modernize even when existing systems appear adequate." Brandon interjected with the confident tone of someone repeating a business school principle. Russell finally turned to acknowledge him directly. "Mr. Ashford, the protocols in question were industry-leading. They were custom designed for our specific equipment and crew requirements by someone who took the time to understand our operations." He shifted his gaze toward me at the end of the table. "Isn't that right, Andrew?" All eyes turned to me. 21 years of professional restraint had prepared me for this moment. I spoke without emotion, presenting only facts. The safety protocols were updated quarterly to accommodate equipment changes and regulatory updates. Their design was actually more advanced than standard industry practices in several aspects, particularly in how they handled specialized rigging and fall protection for high-rise applications. Paul Ashford's expression tightened. "If you had concerns about the transition, you should have raised them through proper channels." "With all due respect," I replied, "my role no longer includes project coordination oversight. I wasn't consulted about the changes." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Russell used the moment to slide folders across the table to each executive. "We've prepared a detailed assessment of our current service agreement and identified several areas where we believe adjustments are necessary. Given recent events, we've concluded that the current arrangement no longer serves our needs." Paul Ashford's face paled as he scanned the document's executive summary. "This represents a significant restructuring of our relationship." "Yes," Russell confirmed. "We're unbundling several services that we believe we can manage more effectively through other means." What Russell didn't explicitly state, what was buried in the detailed appendices, was that these other means included a consulting agreement with me to rebuild and maintain the specialized protocols that had been dismantled at a fraction of what the company had been charging for bundled services. Brandon flipped frantically through the pages, but these changes would reduce the contract value by nearly 40%. Russell nodded. "We believe that accurately reflects the value proposition under the current service model." As the implications sank in, Paul Ashford's gaze shifted between Russell and me, calculation visible behind his eyes. "Perhaps we've been hasty in some of our transition decisions. Andrew clearly has valuable institutional knowledge about your needs. We could consider reinstating his previous role to ensure continuity." It was the opening I had anticipated, the moment when they would attempt to use me to salvage the relationship. Russell glanced my way, the question evident in his expression. Was this what I had been waiting for? A restoration of my position? I maintained neutral composure. "That's a generous offer, but I believe my current role in facilities maintenance is where the company has determined I can best contribute." The confusion on the executives' faces was momentarily satisfying. They had expected eagerness to reclaim my former status, not this passive resistance. Russell continued smoothly. "We've already developed alternative arrangements for the unbundled services. We're prepared to maintain a relationship with your firm, but on these revised terms." The meeting concluded with tentative agreement to review the proposed changes, but the damage was done. As executives huddled in concerned groups afterward, I quietly returned to my maintenance desk. By day's end, the ripples had spread throughout the company. The potential loss of 40% of our largest contract's revenue had triggered panic among leadership. For a company with total annual revenue of approximately $45 million, losing $7.2 million from Allied represented a devastating blow that would directly impact quarterly results. Paul Ashford's assistant requested a private meeting for the following morning. I had expected an offer to restore my position. Instead, I received something more revealing. Paul Ashford sat behind his imposing desk, no longer the confident executive from our morning meeting. "The situation with Allied is unfortunate," he began. "Brandon perhaps moved too quickly with protocol changes, but that's correctable. What concerns me is the timing of these issues coinciding with your transition." I kept my expression neutral. "I'm not sure I understand." "Russell Martinez specifically requested your presence in yesterday's meeting. He referenced protocols you designed. The restructuring proposal contains technical specifications that mirror your work." His eyes narrowed. "Have you been communicating with Allied outside of company channels? As I mentioned during my transition, I've always maintained professional relationships with our contractors." Russell reached out after hearing about my position change, which is natural given our long professional history. Paul leaned back, studying me. And the consulting arrangement referenced in Appendix C of their proposal, the one where they plan to hire an independent advisor to rebuild protocols we're currently charging them premium rates for. I met his gaze directly. I wasn't aware of the specific details in their proposal. As you know, my system access is now limited to maintenance functions. He didn't believe me. That much was clear from his expression, but he also couldn't prove anything improper. My consulting agreement with Russell had been carefully structured to begin officially after Allied's contract revision was finalized. Andrew, his tone softened into something resembling sincerity. We've worked together for 21 years. I've always respected your contributions. Perhaps we acted hastily with the restructuring. Your institutional knowledge is clearly valuable. What would it take to resolve this situation amicably? The question hung between us. This was the negotiation I had anticipated, but the timing surprised me. I had expected them to try salvaging the Allied relationship first before approaching me with concessions. I'm not sure what you're asking, I responded, maintaining my careful neutrality. He sighed with theatrical weariness. Let's be direct. You built the Allied relationship. They trust you. We need that relationship to continue as it has been. Name your terms. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine accepting his offer, a restored position, perhaps with a grander title and increased compensation. The satisfaction of walking back through the office with my status not just returned, but elevated. But then I remembered sitting across from Helen Pierce and Diana Foster, being told my 21 years meant nothing. I remembered Brandon moving into my office before I'd even cleared my personal items. I remembered 2 decades of missed family dinners, of working through illnesses, of answering contractor calls on Christmas morning. I appreciate the conversation, I said, rising from my chair, but I should return to my duties. The quarterly equipment inspection is due by end of day. His face registered genuine shock. You're turning down the opportunity to reclaim your position. I'm honoring the company's original decision about where my skills are best utilized. If there's nothing else, I should get back to those inspection reports. I left him staring after me, visibly struggling to comprehend my refusal. It wasn't the reaction of someone who had been plotting revenge. It was something far more confusing to him, indifference. The next 2 weeks unfolded with increasing tension throughout the company. Allied's contract revision moved forward despite desperate countermeasures. Brandon launched multiple initiatives to prove the value of standard industry protocols, each one undermined by his fundamental misunderstanding of Allied's specialized requirements. Meanwhile, I performed my maintenance duties with quiet precision. I accepted lunch invitations from former team members who suddenly remembered my existence. I provided factual responses when asked about Allied's technical needs, never volunteering information, but never withholding it when directly questioned. My evening hours were spent preparing for my next chapter. Russell and I finalized the consulting framework that would allow Allied to reduce their service costs by 40% while maintaining all critical functions. The arrangement would provide me income comparable to my former position while requiring fewer hours, a more balanced life than I'd known in 21 years. 3 days before Allied's contract decision deadline, Brandon appeared at my maintenance workstation. His confident demeanor had acquired a desperate edge over recent weeks. I need your help with Allied, he stated without preamble. I looked up from my computer. How can I assist? The safety protocols you built, their operations team keeps referencing customizations that aren't documented anywhere. We need to replicate those functions in standard protocols before their board meeting on Friday. I had anticipated this moment. I'd be happy to explain the protocol architecture. When would you like to discuss it? Relief washed over his features. Now, if possible. I've reserved a conference room. For the next 3 hours, I walked Brandon through the intricate systems I had built over years. I explained every customization, every workaround, every special function designed specifically for Allied's unique requirements. I answered his increasingly frantic questions with patient clarity. What became evident to both of us was that these functions couldn't simply be replicated in standard protocols, not in 3 days, not in 3 weeks. The systems I had built were the product of years of incremental adjustments based on deep understanding of the contractor's evolving needs. As our session concluded, Brandon's expression had transformed from desperate hope to resigned understanding. You built all this yourself over time? Yes, with input from their operations team. He shook his head slowly, and I dismantled it in 3 weeks. For the first time, I felt a flicker of sympathy for him. He was young, ambitious, and clearly intelligent. His primary failing wasn't incompetence, but inexperience and the arrogance that often accompanies it. Systems can be rebuilt. I offered with proper understanding of the requirements. He gathered his notes, exhaustion evident in his movements. The board meeting is Friday, even working around the clock. There's no way to restore what they need by then. Thursday evening, I received an unexpected call from Paul Ashford. Allied's board meets tomorrow morning. Brandon tells me you've been helpful explaining the technical requirements, but we're still facing a significant contract reduction. I'm sorry to hear that. We've prepared a counter-proposal, full restoration of your previous position with a substantial increase in compensation and authority. Senior director level with equity participation, he paused, in exchange for your active intervention with Allied. Convince them to maintain the full service agreement. It was more than I had expected, significantly more. The equity offer alone represented financial security I had never achieved despite my years of service. That's very generous. We value loyalty, Andrew. Your knowledge is irreplaceable. The irony was almost painful. And Brandon? He'll remain in a development role, focusing on new business rather than existing account management. I considered the offer carefully. It represented everything I had worked toward for 21 years: recognition, authority, financial security. All I needed to do was convince Russell to continue overpaying for bundled services his company didn't need. I appreciate the offer, but I don't believe I can influence Allied's decision at this point. Their analysis appears quite thorough. Silence stretched across the line. When he spoke again, his tone had hardened. I see, then I wish you luck with your future endeavors. Friday morning, I submitted my resignation effective immediately. I cleared my few personal items from the maintenance desk and walked through the lobby one final time. Sophie Walsh gave me a knowing smile as I passed. They're all in the executive conference room, she whispered. Allied's board decision is being delivered by conference call. I nodded my thanks and continued toward the exit, stepping into the bright spring morning with a curious lightness. For the first time in 21 years, I had nowhere specific I needed to be. The months that followed unfolded with a rhythm entirely different from my previous professional life. I worked directly with Allied's technical team to rebuild the custom safety protocols, this time with comprehensive documentation and training materials. The work was challenging and satisfying, rarely extending beyond reasonable hours. For the first time in decades, I had evenings free to explore interests long set aside. I coached Jake's travel baseball team. I helped Emma with her engineering projects. I started restoring that '75 Chevy in my garage. 6 months later, an industry newsletter reported that my former company had been acquired by a larger competitor. Paul Ashford had stepped down. The acquisition price represented a 50% devaluation from the previous year's market position. The article mentioned unexpected contractor relationship losses as a contributing factor. When Russell forwarded me the article, I replied honestly. Every company makes choices about what they value. Some learn too late that relationships and institutional knowledge can't be replaced by family connections and MBA degrees. That evening, I hosted a barbecue, something I had never found time for during my former life. As conversation and laughter filled my backyard, I realized that the most powerful form of reclaiming your value isn't found in revenge at all. It's found in building something better that they can't touch. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cast aside despite your dedication and excellence, remember this. Your value doesn't diminish based on someone else's inability to see it. The most satisfying response to those who undervalue you isn't plotting elaborate revenge. It's recognizing your own worth and building something better. When companies prioritize politics over performance, family connections over competence, the market has a way of correcting itself. Your job isn't to force that correction. It's to position yourself to benefit when it inevitably happens. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply walking away and letting your absence speak louder than your presence ever could.